Hey, ladies and gentlemen, what's up? It's the Culture Detective here investigating your favorite albums, and today I'm going to do an album review on Pink Floyd's The Dark Side of the Moon. So to continue my Pink Floyd album review series, of course, at some point I have to review the Big Four. So I have arrived at the first album of the Big Four. That is The Dark Side of the Moon, released on March 1st, 1973. And this album right here, it's definitely a classic. It's the most classic of the classic. If you go to top10.com, where people would, do a poll on, what are their favorite albums, this album would come out on top, number one. A lot of people consider this album as the best album ever. So, it's a huge deal. It's a huge deal. Yeah, and me personally, I can't really disagree. I mean, it is a really great album. Now, if you ask me what is my favorite album ever, it may not be this album, but if you ask me, is this the best album ever, I can't really deny. I can't exactly say which album is the best, because A, art is subjective, B, I mean, every album has its flaws, but this thing, it's nearly flawless. It's nearly perfect. So damn near. It's actually insane. And the fact that this album is released in 1973 and it's so ahead of its time, it's mind-blowing. And I mean, yeah, a lot of people find this album overrated. I mean, a lot of hardcore Pink Floyd fans would prefer Wish You Were Here or Animals over this, but still, this album, it's oh my god. So Pink Floyd, progressive rock, psychedelic rock band, started off with baroque pop / pop folk roots with Piper at the Gates of Dawn, and then they started to get more experimental and progressive as time goes by, with A Saucer Full of Secrets and Atom Heart Mother. And before this album's released, they also made a soundtrack album, Obscured by Clouds, which is actually a really, really criminally underrated album. It's full of gems and highlights as well, but it's basically a precursor for what greatness is about to come, because on this album, the production is so much more matured. Every single instrumental and even the vocals are mixed so finely. It is pretty much Pink Floyd at their peaks. And then we have the vocals, because in previous Pink Floyd albums, the vocals are usually the weakest part of their entire musical appeal, but the vocals on this album, they're mixed in a way, they would add reverb, they would add vocal harmonies and layers, and they make the vocals on this album pretty fantastic, actually. The instrumentals, they are amazing as well. I mean, not only do you get the really well-toned guitars and synths on this thing, the drums are great, and then you get the saxophones and the pianos, and not to forget the samples. Basically, they would actually ask different people questions like, when is the last time you punched somebody, or are you afraid of death? And they would record those answers and actually put those answers in this album. And it's not a very new thing nowadays, but back then in 1973, it's actually pretty innovative. And they would also do, field recordings of airports, and they would sample cashier sounds, money sounds, they would sample alarm clocks and all of that. It's a very, very sonically innovative and creative album. Not only that, the flow of the album is pretty much flawless. We have 10 tracks on the album, and if it's a vinyl, it has 2 sides, and each side has 5 tracks. And on each side, there is an intro, and on the other side, there is an outro. On both sides, there is an instrumental interlude. One side is On the Run, the other side is Any Color You Like, and they are at the middle of the 5 tracks. So it's a really balanced album. Not only that, the transitions between song to song is absolutely smooth. It's seamless, and the ending of the album actually loops perfectly back to the opening of the album, making the flow even smoother. And aside from that, what's also really impressive is Pink Floyd manages to really perfectly balance between solid musical songwriting and experimentation. Like on the album The Piper at the Gates of Dawn, it's just songwriting. There isn't much experimentation in it. And then we have albums like Uma Guma, which, if you don't know, is my least favorite Pink Floyd album. The whole album is experimental, and that's it. There really isn't much in terms of solid songwriting, so it felt like a really hollow and uninteresting and drab and half-baked album. But on this album, it is perfectly balanced in a way. Every single moment of the album is enjoyable, interesting, and most of the tracks on the album are actually really meaningful, which leads to my final compliment for the album overall, and that is it's a concept album. And it's the year 1973. Again, concept albums, they are not a huge thing. Pink Floyd is one of the bands that really started the whole, concept album hype, the concept album the trend, which then, of course, we have David Bowie's Ziggy Stardust, which is also, in my opinion, one of the greatest albums of all times. But back to The Dark Side of the Moon. The concept is basically things that drive people mad. So money, conflict, time, mental illness, death, mortality. And together, basically every single track on this album is basically about that. So we're not going to get any, beat around the bush. We're not going to get any love songs, or we're not going to get any songs about, space exploration, spooky, strange, whoa. The album starts off with the intro track, Speak to Me, which is, even though it's 1 minute long, it's a fantastic intro track because it starts off with near silence, and then we get these very, very slow heartbeats, which then afterwards we get layers upon layers of instrumentals and sort of samples layering on top, making it more and more noisy and chaotic. We get samples of people speaking, spoken word, on being mad. This is what happens when I'm mad. And then we get laughter sounds, we get cashier sounds, which then will return on the track Money. We get screams like crow screams, and it's just all sorts of noises, laughter, and all mixed and mashed together, and you really feel like you're about to enter a world of chaos. And then immediately we have the second track, Breathe in the Air, where the noise and the chaos builds up to a point and you're like, wow, it's about to explode, and then it just drops. It just drops down to a really relaxing and homogeneous track that is Breathe in the Air. Not only is it a cool surprise, but also the way the instrumentals all dropped and we just enter the album like this, it's really brilliant. It's almost like opening a door when the outside world is super windy and noisy and snowy, and you open a door to a really warm and peaceful hut out of nowhere. That's the kind of feeling you would get. Anyways, Breathe in the Air. It's beautiful. The instrumentals, they are saturated, they're homogeneous, as well as colorful. The guitars, again, fine-tuned. Very, very fine-tuned. And this is probably the only track on the album that really has a positive note. The lyrics, they are actually pretty optimistic. Breathe in the air, sort of relax, but at the end, it starts to turn sour with for long you live and high you fly, but only if you ride the tide, and balanced on the biggest wave, your race towards an early grave. Which then leads to the rest of the album, which, deal with more sour and more concerning matters. Actually, the third track is the noisy instrumental interlude that is On the Run. It's 3 minutes and 46 seconds long of just noises. We get these constant swirling swooshes that are very strange, and it gets more and more chaotic as the track progresses. We get really busy electronic buzzes that sometimes would turn into scratches and swabbles. It would be really migraine inducing. We would get footsteps of people running, and also field recordings of an airport, what I believe to be an airport. And it just, this track, while there isn't any lyrics or, you know, vocals on this track, it just shows how stressful life can be, especially when back in the 70s, people are heading towards a more knowledge-based world, a more financial, technological world. I mean, life has become so much more busy and stressful and packed. And yeah, the track On the Run, it really reflects the change in the society around the world in the early 70s and the late 60s. The fourth track, Time, is another classic, legendary track from Pink Floyd. The track is called Time, T-I-M-E, Time. And wow, this track is quite the epic. Starting off, we have alarm clocks. We only have like clock noises. We get these wooden ticking and talking, metallic clanging and clanging, bells tolling, and together they form this wall of noise, just cacophonous. And then afterwards, it just quiets down, and then the instrumental starts to build up, and it starts to sound really interesting. Again, we get the raw hand drums, which is a really nice way to sort of imitate the wooden clocks ticking and talking. And then we get the very progressive guitars, and they do not necessarily show a tone or anything. It's not like they're sad guitars or melancholic guitars, but it's not like they're optimistic either. They don't have a specific emotion or feel to it, yet they sound fantastic. They have a bold, larger than life attitude to them, and if anything, they sound stoic, they sound truthful. So Roger Waters had a verse on this thing, and then afterwards we have David Gilmour's verse after a very impressive, bold, larger than life guitar solo. And then we have again David Gilmour's verse and Richard Wright, who also sang as well. And wow, this verse, wow. And you run to catch up with the sun, but it's sinking, racing around to come up behind you again. The sun is the same in a relative way, but you're older, shorter of breath, and one day closer to death. And by the end of the verse, the time is gone, the song is over, thought I'd something more to say. Damn. Yeah, this is scary. This is a really realistic and grim depiction of how powerful time is. And I love the topic of this track. I feel like not enough songs nowadays talk about this topic, and that is time passing by, time being too fast. Time is, to me, the scariest force in the world. It never stops. We stop all the time. We have to sleep, sometimes we rest, we relax, but time never stops. And when we get old, you know, before we die, when we're on our deathbed, we would look back when we were actually capable of doing things, and we'd go, wow, there are so much that I could have done, but I didn't do it, and now I regret it. And that's a horrifying feeling. I do not want to have that feeling. I want to live life to the fullest if I can. Yeah, time is horrifying. Time is horrifying. Anyways, by the end of the song, they did a little breathe reprise, which is a really nice sort of a conclusion before we head over to the last track of side A. That is The Great Gig in the Sky, which, while it's a pretty simple track, it's a really powerful track. At first we get these beautiful, very beautiful, breathtaking, life-affirming, powerful pianos, which then builds up to a very just bold and humongous climax. And on top of that, we get these female vocals, which just screams in a really just life and death way. It's very huge. And before the scream, we also get samples of, you know, people being asked if they're afraid of death, and one of the person who actually ended up on the album says that he's not afraid of death. And this track, you can tell it's about mortality. Yeah, it's some powerful stuff. Anyways, we move over to side B, starting off with the track Money, which is easily one of the most accessible tracks from Pink Floyd. And it's another legendary track. Again, this is the title of the track, Money. That's the name of the track. And starting off, we get these cashier sounds, these money sounds, coins, sort of dollar bills, you know, stacking on top of one another, and it's arranged in a way it's very rhythmic. And then afterwards, we get the bass line, which is slick. And I didn't even hear it on the first time, but apparently it's in 7/8. Bam 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 bam. 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 1 2. It's in 7/8, and it sounds so smooth and seamless, and it's in 7/8. Anyways, the Gilmore vocals on this thing. The way there was a lot of reverb on top of his vocals, make his vocals pop out so much more. And we have the lyrics, and they have a sense of humor. They are outstanding. They are ear grabbing. And then we get the sax solo, the energy, and the attitude of that sax solo. It's just so swagger and just so tasteful as well. And especially towards the end, when the saxophone sounds sort of intensify and become louder and louder and more playful, it's just fantastic. Anyways, afterwards we have Us and Them, an 8-minute long track, and it's incredibly soothing and meditative and sweet. With a tinge of sadness. On top of it, we get a very beautiful, soft bed of synths, as well as some slow drums. On top of it, we also get saxophones that are way slower and dreamier, as well as very beautiful, very gorgeous pianos. And the track is essentially about, you know, conflict. The previous track, Money, is of course about money and how people are saying, you know, it's the root of all evils, and how money can drive people to do things because of greed. And then now we have Us and Them, which is about, you know, conflict. Us, them. Us, them. You know, me versus you. And we also have Black and Blue, which a lot of people think it's a reference to bruises, like when people beat you up, you get bruises. It's black and blue. The climaxes during the verses, while the track overall is really soothing, the climaxes, they are really bright and really shiny and powerful as well. And these little instrumental climaxes really keep the pace of the track going, and it's another really solid track. Nothing more I can say. Anyways, we have the track Any Color You Like up next, which is a 3.5-minute long instrumental track, and it's a really bright, relaxing, and laid-back track, almost like a palate cleanser. And we get these layers of synths and guitars, and the production of those synths and guitars are fantastic. The wailing guitars, the winding guitars, the crispy guitars, all three kinds of guitars, the way they're layered, plus the very colorful, very 70s sounding synths, all of them together, they're very vibrant, very colorful, very ear-grabbing. Even though the song doesn't really have much in terms of impact or meaning, it's still a really good song, and its placement on the album, it's a very clever placement. I mean, there's no better position in the album better to place a track like this. Anyways, the album ends off with Brain Damage and Eclipse. Brain Damage is obviously a track about mental illness, In the early times of Pink Floyd, the band didn't have David Gilmour, they had Syd Barrett, but because of schizophrenia reasons, Syd Barrett had to leave the band, and the band sort of sings about him on this track. The guitars, while they have a comedic tone, they have a very cuckoo tone to them. The lyrics are rather, I won't say grim, but descriptive of mental illness, especially that of schizophrenia. And we have the line, "And if your head explodes with dark forebodings too, I'll see you on the dark side of the moon." And what I love about this track is that it's just filled to the brim with finality. There is a strong sense of finality on the album. It's like we're in the closing chapter of one really epic book, or maybe we're in the last act of one really epic play. There's this very strong sense of finality when all the instrumentals sort of converge together, especially towards the end, where we get these choir vocals. And then, of course, we enter the last track, Eclipse, where it's truly, truly final, even more final than the last track. What's very amazing about Eclipse is that Eclipse sounds similar to Brain Damage in that they have similar chords, but the tempo is a little different, the rhythm is a little different, and the lyrics are definitely different. And yeah, it's a real creative way to end off the album. And we have lyrics like, "All that you touch, all that you see, all that you taste, all you feel, all that you love, all that you hate, all you distrust, all you save, all this, all that." And it sort of concludes everything in our lives and say that we're still under the moon. And it's a really epic conclusion. It's very life affirming. It just goes over every single element of our daily lives. And at the end, we even have a bit of plot twist, and that is, haha, there is actually no dark side of the moon. It was all dark. And that's the ending of the album. And it's a very impressive musical plot twist, I have to say. It's almost like, haha, the entire album, it's pointless. But actually, if you look deeper into it, it's like, I'll see you in the dark side of the moon. Like, yeah, the bad part of life, but when the sample says it's all dark, it basically means that all of life is basically, you know, like this, except we still manage to find hope and light because of the sun. And I guess in a way it's also a pretty positive ending note. But yeah, overall at the end it just quiets down, and we get these slow heartbeats again, and it sort of loops back to the intro of the album once again, very creatively. And yeah, that's a very, very, very memorable ending to the album. So overall, The Dark Side of the Moon definitely deserves its praise, in my opinion. It's a really nearly perfect album. Every single track here sounds slightly different from one another, yet they don't feel like they're completely out of place. They all sound and feel similar still. It's cohesive, but also it's not bland. And the album, it's versatile, but also not all over the place. The themes and song topics explored on this album is very mature, and it's song topics that I think is universal. I mean, everyone in the world can also relate to. I think the performance, the production, they're all really on point, and I can't really find anything bad about this album. It's really friggin' perfect. If there's one thing about this album that I guess I won't say bad thing, but if there's one thing that I would like to see improved is I wish there would be more of a meaning to the track Any Color You Like. But I guess I'm already really happy with what this album is. So yeah, can't say much. My favorite track here is I honestly have no idea. It could be Time, it could be Money, it could be Breathe, it could be Brain Damage, Eclipse. I don't know. I'm gonna go with Time, And my least favorite track here is Any Color You Like, if I had to pick one. So yeah, I'm giving Pink Floyd's The Dark Side of the Moon a 10 out of 10. So, have you listened to The Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd? From 1 to 10, how much is rated? Like if you like it, and subscribe if you want more. And thanks for watching. I will, of course, review the rest of all Pink Floyd albums in this month. I'll try my best. I will also review the latest Jeff Rosenstock, Freddie Gibbs and the Alchemist, the latest Backswash and Deer, Hoof, and Proto Martyr, and yeah, very soon.